until I really cracked down on the policy with my clients, that every time a fisherman was charged with something, a false statement charge got thrown in. And they were pretty spurious, but they were throwing them in every case. And that's when we started seeing the criminal investigators come out, the cards come out. The difficulty with the fines is that those emanate not from the law enforcement arm, they emanate from the General Counsel for Law Enforcement, and I'm not sure that we've seen or heard anything from that branch because they seem to be independent. But we see repeat fines, I mean, ridiculous fines out of the Northeast region on a regular basis. I mean, that's really what prompted my initial complaints to the agency and to my congressional delegation going back to the late 90s.
I just want to clarify. I know you meant this when Genie asked the problem with the statute. You're obviously talking about the enforcement part, the lack of flexibility. You weren't talking about that. So you're saying that they can improve enforcement without a statutory change?
I think you can improve enforcement without a statutory change. My concern is, given the track record between industry and this agency, I'm not sure that they have to.
No, I appreciate that. I just didn't want, we weren't talking there about the flexibility. You talked about the disadvantage you have because you can't get the information which they use for setting the penalty. Is that different than other law enforcement situations? Are you given less information here than you might be if you were defending people in other circumstances?
In my experience, and I've dealt with other administrative agencies, fortunately I don't do much criminal law, it's unprecedented because basically they take the position, we're attorneys, we assess the fines, somewhere we do have a minor set of guidelines.
All right, let me cut through this, and I think Ms. King and I will initiate a pretty strong request to the Fishery Service that they no longer do this. We're the federal government, we're not some individual entity in a dispute. We have an obligation to be fair to citizens. So for the federal government acting that way seems to be inappropriate. I think if you will support us, supply us with a memorandum, I believe we will be able to insist that they provide you the information. You're not trying to get it off, but you have some kind of basis for all this. Let me say, Mr. Jones, I appreciate you staying here. Mr. Burgess has made some pretty strong statements. I am now asking you, Mr. Jones, to look into those and tell me if you can test this. For instance, someone asking him what he made, what the captain made, and then tell me if any disciplinary action was taken or what was done about that. Because once we hear these things, it really is important for us to know that people are not going to be dealing with it. So every one of the specifics Mr. Burgess mentioned, I would ask that you talk to. Now, on the Mr. Kinney already asked, the cost of doing business is not statutory. This notion that shouldn't be the case. Mr. Kendall, who was it who I would stop coming to the meeting?
Well, there was a former Coast Guard officer by the name of Captain Raymond Brown, and I think you might recall that you asked the Admiral to appear in your office one time to explain his actions at that particular point in time. Captain Brown was a difficult gentleman to get along with. He seemed to think that all fishermen were violators, and if those that weren't, it was only because he hadn't caught them yet. Matter of fact, he made that statement to Rodney Avila at one point, and Captain Avila took quite a bit of offense to that. Even to this day, he does. I like to kid him about it. But it was a serious type of thing because, like I say, it was a great organization or a great group
what's
to
the
work
status?
with. I'm sorry?
To the recorder, it's AVILA is Rodney Avila. What's the status? Is that what we're trying to resuscitate? Or is that too far gone? Is that what we're trying to resuscitate or is it too far gone?
I think, well, the reauthorization never reappeared in Magnuson again, and it never extended to any of the other council regions. But I think, yes, sir, I think it is very very important that we try to rebuild those particular roads, because it was a way for us to interact with them on a civil level without getting into our criminal situations. And I think it worked quite well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know, like everybody's got to go to all, I'll go back.
Thank you very much, Congressman Frank. Mr. Burgess, I listened very carefully to your recounting your experience with enforcement. Do you feel like you would be treated as a criminal?
Pretty much, yes.
And is that in talking to your colleagues who are fishermen, is that something that your experience is totally unusual, or have you ever talked to people who have had somewhat similar experience?
I don't think there's anybody in the industry around you that will disagree with me right now.
What do you, as a fisherman, want to see change? This committee is an oversight committee, but it's also government reform. What do you want to see change? We're here to listen to you. What do you want to see change?
Well, right now, the amount of gentlemen that are left in the industry, we all get along. It wasn't really that way years ago. Now there's only a handful of guys left. Everybody trusts each other. We work together. We want to be respected as hard-working individuals, small business. We want to stay in the industry. If you get a piece of paper and there's a date wrong, or you don't have it in your paperwork on the boat, I don't want a $10,000 fine. I want to be able to say, yes, I have it. It's at home, my paperwork. Or call the agency, everything's good. The entire fleet, every owner, captain, the guys on deck, they're so afraid of doing one thing wrong and losing everything they've ever worked for. That's not what we're all about. We are the environmentalists. We've rebuilt this fishery. We want to keep it that way. And we just want to be treated as honest, hard-working people.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Now, Mr. Willett, in your written testimony, you said, quote, "Compliance, not fines, should be the goal." Well, I think we all agree. And can you give us three things a reformed office for law enforcement would do differently to optimize compliance?
I would hope so. And the concern I see now is
What can they do? Give me some examples of what they could do to do it better.
for example, Mr. Burgess had an issue with days at sea. One of the problems is that NOAA, who keeps a record of a vessel's days at sea, is often unable to tell us because they do an internal calculation that we don't have access to. It may be a scalloper as to how many times he dips within the line. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but boats are tracked. They're tracked every time they leave port by an electronic monitoring system. NOAA is unable to give us often a vessel's days at sea. Yet, if you're out of them, they will continue to issue sailing numbers, and they know exactly when to meet you in port to seize the catch because they know when you're coming in. There are many instances where NOAA personnel observe or are able to detect potential violations, and they really just sit back and let them occur. And that's a significant problem I have. We had a recent case involving some people who were late on their logbook compliance. People at the agency knew it. They said it was a crucial issue. They had to have this data on a weekly basis. Yet they waited 8 months before they took any action. And the only action they took was not to call the boat and say, "Can you give us the numbers?" They called NOAA law enforcement, who issued a $250,000 fine. There's really a very poor working relationship between the industry and agency, and that's something that needs to improve.
Let me follow up on that. I mean, do you think serious reform of OLE is possible under the current leadership?
I am very concerned about the ability of NOAA to work with this industry in a committed, cooperative fashion as it's currently structured.
Mr. Burgess, would you answer the question? The question is, do you think serious reform of OLE is possible under the current leadership?
It hasn't taken place yet. It should have taken place years ago.
Mr. Kendall?
I would suggest that the problem doesn't start at the bottom, it actually starts at the top, sir. And if this is going to come, it's going to have to filter its way down. They can't continue to treat the industry as criminals, common criminals, and expect that the agents are going to work with them on a one-to-one basis. I mean, people just don't work that way. Once you build up that feeling that there's something wrong with this person, you tend to look at them a little bit differently, and they have.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall, and thank the panel. I'm going to
Chairman,
ask...
could I just, so we get on amendments, right?
I was going to go for a closing statement to Mr. Tierney and then to Congressman Frank. Thank you, Congressman Frank. Congressman Tierney, you recognize your closing statement.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we appreciate it a great deal that you were willing to come here and have this hearing in Boston. It means a lot to us, and we appreciate that. And Barney Frank, we appreciate all the work that you've done on this issue over the years, and that you're continuing to do is important. Appreciate the mayor and the local representatives for their effort and everybody in the community here. I think what we've heard here today is a good example of what we've been screaming about for a period of time. With varying and unsatisfactory results of this, we have a new administrator. Even though I know that some people thought that she was listening today and they're not quite sure she heard, we're going to keep working at it to make sure that what was said is heard as well as we continue on that. Mr. Jones, thank you for staying here. I hope you heard it, including the introspection that's necessary at the top side for you, and then right down through all of your personnel working on that. This is not something that can continue. It's gone on far too long. We need to look at it legislatively. We need to look at it the way the enforcement is actually exercised. And all of the record that you put forward today is going to help us go back to our colleagues and work in both of those avenues. I think the legislation is the first push on that, and the continued push on how they're enforcing that law. Taking a look at it, we'll expect a report from Mr. Jones on the incidents, individual incidents, and from Mr. Kinzer, with the Inspector General on those individual incidents. We're not all about looking back, but it's important to make sure that we identify what went wrong and make sure that that's rectified so we can go forward and have some knowledge that what we're going to do then is going to clarify and correct the situation. So again, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Frank on that, and we've got some work to do and we'll be doing it.
Thank you very much for a closing statement. Chair recognizes Congressman Frank.
I join my colleague. First, I appreciate the Cheney's taking me to do this, and then the chairman to come out from his district on the way to Washington. Appreciate it. I did want to say that there is a case of Mr. Kendall reminded me. I became the representative of the fishing industry in New Bedford in 1992, and one of the first things I learned about was the meat count, and we did get that abolished. So that is no longer there, but it's relevant because it was inherently difficult means of enforcement. And it reinforces, in my view, the notion that you've got to get the law right, because there are some things that are always going to be the problem. The other, I want to say, let me reiterate, law enforcement is a tough business, and no one should take this as any denigration of people who are in the law enforcement business. These are also men and women who do a tough job, and they do a dangerous job sometimes. It is not their fault if they are put in inappropriate situations. If people who are in law enforcement are put in a situation in which the primary emphasis ought to be elsewhere. So this is not necessarily a criticism to them. There are obviously some individuals who have been abusive, and it's important while maintaining respect for the whole operation to be able to deal with that. So I do look forward to hearing about how this is going to be corrected, and I have to say to Mr. Jones and to Dr. Lachenko, Mr. Schwab, who's here, who's now the head of this, I have not yet heard a response proportionate to the problem that has to be resolved. We will be looking at that carefully. But I think there is a natural tendency to kind of denigrate the value of the seriousness of the problem. But finally, Mr. Kearney and I look forward to working with our colleagues. People say, oh, I don't have to say I told you so. That's a lie. Everybody loves to say I told you so when you get those opportunities. And I find as I get older, saying I told you so is one of the few pleasures that does not diminish with age, so I like to say it. But Ms. Kitty and I voted against the Madison Act in 2006 when it was passed by the lame duck Congress under President Bush. It was, I think, too rigid and flexible then. I do not believe you can solve all these problems, also dealing with the statute. So we will continue to press for improvements in the administration within the statute, but we will also bring this back, meeting soon with a group of our colleagues up and down the Atlantic coast, not just in the Northeast, but from Maine to Florida and I hope elsewhere as well. We are determined to get to begin the process of amending the Madison Act. That's an essential part of fixing this problem.
I thank my colleague, and I want to say that for a congressional investigative subcommittee to have a field hearing anywhere, this doesn't happen. The reason why we came here to Gloucester is because Congressman Tierney expressed to me his great concern about arbitrary, aggressive, and abusive enforcement practices. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Frank. We're not against law enforcement. We make laws are enforced. That's part of the cycle of government's involvement. But what brought a congressional investigative subcommittee here were a number of red flags that we saw in the IG report, and that came from talking to dozens of people we interviewed prior to this hearing. And so, and of course, Mr. Frank and other members are on the seacoast. This is an ongoing interest, and it's an ongoing interest of this investigative subcommittee. We're going to retain jurisdiction. When I heard Mr. Burgess's account, and I'll just say this to Mr. Jones, I'm glad you stayed to listen. The gotcha climate that he portrays. If you had been treated as a witness with a gotcha, you would have been humiliated before the subcommittee, but we don't do that. You have to realize when you have the kind of power that law enforcement does have, you enforce the law, but you also have to be careful that it's not done in a way that seems partial and arbitrary and doesn't, and if you're going to put somebody out of business, you better have a damn good reason. This subcommittee is going to continue to look at this. I want the administrator to understand that we are not going to let this go. And I look forward to asking some more questions. We'll submit some follow-up questions. I want to thank you for your presence here. I want to thank Mayor Kirk and the City of Gloucester for welcoming us in this beautiful structure here, this historic structure. This town has been part of the history of the United States and its contribution to commerce for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if this subcommittee has anything to do about it, and certainly Congressman Tierney does and will, we're going to look forward to seeing you continue to do your work for many years to come. This subcommittee stands adjourned.